Now, in the mid-1980s, there was a push to develop the new NATO frigate replacement, because 8 of the NATO nations were coming up to the point where they would want to replace their existing frigates. So you had Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Spain, UK and USA, all bringing their requirements together to produce a common frigate. And modularity in production and economy of scale were expected to be the big benefits to all 8 participants. Now, the plan fell apart. It wasn't really very surprising that the plan fell apart because with differing requirements and slightly differing timescales and differing procurement plans, different nations diverged. And I say the plan fell apart. It was 1989 the plan fell apart. The most urgent UK need remaining was for a Type 42 air defence replacement destroyer, and the NATO frigate replacement would not suffice. However, the British requirement was very similar to the requirement for the French and the Italians. So we produced Project Horizon, which was a tri-national project to provide a modern air defence ship for all 3 nations. And this grew out of the embers of the NATO frigate requirement project. This was now christened the Common New Generation Frigate, CNGF, and it was a fully tri-national affair with project offices set up in the 3 countries to consider the hull, the combat management system, the radar, the missiles, and electronic warfare. And this was set up knowing that there would be some national variations, but this time differences were to be accommodated in a much more modular design. So, Project Horizon. It started off from the UK perspective with us having Type 42 destroyers. We had 12 of those. They were 1970s generation and were coming towards the end of their useful and productive lives. We obviously were looking at the NATO frigate replacement as a replacement for that air defence destroyer or frigate. But then we moved to Common New Generation Frigate with the French and the Italians. And if you look at the right-hand side, you can see what the expectation was. The expectation was that the UK would buy 12 of these frigates, Italy would buy 6, and France would buy 4. So roughly half of them were going to be produced for the UK, for the Royal Navy. There was design agreement initially, except there were some slight differences. France and Italy wanted short-range protection for their surface assets from air attack because they were focused on Mediterranean operations and carrier escort. The UK wanted something slightly different. We wanted the short-range protection, but we also wanted long-range protection, so we were flexible for North Atlantic operations, convoy escort, and working in the high north. As far as radar were concerned, the French and Italians had a joint project for a passive phased array radar, which was electronically steered rather than physically steered. And the UK had its own project, which was ultimately being run by British Aerospace, which was the Samson active phased array, slightly different kind of radar, longer range and more capable. There was common agreement on the missile system. There was a vertical launch system going to be put into the ships, and they would have a variable mix of Aster 15 and Aster 30 missiles produced by the French. And these were roughly a sort of effective engagement range of 15 kilometres and 30 kilometres out from the ship, though with extensions eventually to 15 kilometres and 15 nautical miles and 60 nautical miles. We weren't going to use the US Mark 41 vertical launch system, even though that was becoming common across the West, because the PAM system, the French design, was felt to be better for the requirements for the UK, France and Italy. But as with the NFR project, national differences in procurement led to the breakup of the project. The biggest difference was that the UK was buying the largest fraction of the ships, but France and Italy held out for disproportionate control and a disproportionate work share and production share of the ships that were being produced. So in the end, in 1999, the UK withdrew from this project, and France and Italy went together on a separate project. So we had Type 42 replacement required, NFR 90 didn't work, CNGF wasn't working very well. We decided to build our Type 45 destroyers, which were based on the Common New Generation frigate, but to our unique requirements. And the Italians and French built their Project Horizon destroyers, Horizon in France and Orrizonte in Italy. But costs had escalated, and the UK could only afford 6 ships rather than 12. Each one was going to cost £1 billion, and the French and Italians couldn't afford their 4 and 6 ships respectively, and they went down to 2 ships each, again, each costing something like £1 billion. So these were expensive ships, and none of the nations could actually afford the number that they really wanted for their military requirements. And comparing with the Type 42 destroyers, in equivalent money, in sort of 1999 pounds, the Type 42 destroyers cost the equivalent of about 200 to 300k, 200 to 300 million pounds each, whereas the Type 45 destroyer was going to be something like 4 to 5 times that expense. So military cost escalation is a phenomenon. Anyway, when it came to the ships that were eventually produced, you have at the top there a model of the Italian Orrizonte destroyer, and at the bottom you've got a UK Type 45. Superficially, they look very, very similar, which is not surprising because the differences that caused the breakup of the trinational project were really to do with procurement rather than the specification. So the designs are really quite close cousins. If you look from the stern, both have large helodecks, both have hidden boat bays, hidden so that you don't have boats exposed and causing big radar reflections. You've got a long-range radar on the mast towards the rear of each ship. You've got a pole mast somewhere near the middle, which contains some electronic warfare and communications equipment. And towards the front, you've got a foremast, which is topped with a spherical radar. And then in front of that, you've got guns and vertical launch cells for the anti-aircraft missiles. The main differences really are in the choice of the main gun. The UK has standardised on a 4.5-inch gun for many, many years, and we stuck with that. The Italians and French went for 75mm or 3-inch guns, and the French vessel had 2 at the bow and none at the stern. The Italian one had an extra gun at the stern. You can see just above the helicopter hangar there. And the layout of the funnels is a little bit different because the internal machinery has been configured slightly differently. But by and large, you can see the family resemblance. The UK vessels are slightly heavier. The length is exactly the same. The French and Italian ships have some very slight differences. They're sort of brother and sister rather than twins, siblings rather than twins, certainly not distant cousins. The only real differences are the extra gun that the Italians put on the back, whereas the French put some extra electronic warfare in that position. And there are a few differences amidships where the anti-surface ship missiles are placed. You can see in the left-hand picture, bottom left, the French ship there in the middle, there's some little tubular exocet launchers poking out the just between the funnels and the pole mast. Whereas on the Italian ship, the photo there, it doesn't have any missiles fitted, though it's fitted for but not with those missiles. There are also some light weapons changes just due to national requirements. And the Italians also have quite an interesting audible distraction device that they put on, which is it's like a very, very loud speaker to try and deter boats from coming too close to the ship without actually firing any ordnance at them. There's another difference between the French and Italian ships, which I cannot work out, and neither can any of the serving or ex-naval staff that I've talked to about this. If you look at the Italian version up at the top and the French one at the bottom, the difference is a lot of carbuncles along the hull. And these seem to be slightly soft, they don't seem to be metallic, and they do seem to ooze water or some kind of fluid because there are rust marks streaking down from them. And if anyone has an idea what those are, I'd be very interested. And you get similar differences between previous and post-CNGF French and Italian ships where they've used the same design, but the Italian ones seem to be covered with these carbuncles. It's a photo quiz, effectively, there. The Italian ship Andrea Doria, which was one of the two that they built, visited Portsmouth back in the earlier part of this year, which gave a lovely opportunity for getting some very good high-resolution photographs of the ship. It looks relatively smart, a little bit worse for wear, could do with a bit of a repaint. Though, when we look a little bit closer, you'll see they have done a bit of repainting. On the right-hand side there, you can see the main long-range radar in black at the top there, and the mast that's supporting it. And you can see that they've touched up the paint with a slightly darker shade up until about the point where whatever man or roller was applying the paint could reach. And similar on other parts of the ship there. And this is quite an interesting feature for me because quite often ships are painted uniform colour all the way across. In reality, you get differences either because of sun fading or because of patching that's been done, and it's worth reproducing that if you want to make an accurate model of a ship as it looks in real life. Left-hand photo just gives a close-up of the dome that covers the passive phased array radar, and underneath that dome you've got these little yellow rectangles which are the electronic warfare receiver system. And then the pole mast, which is also visible there, has some communications electronics for reception and transmission. Another close-up of the Italian ship, some closer range weapons and some fairly unambiguous legends encouraging people to stay well away from the ship itself, both in Arabic and in English, interestingly. When it comes to models of these ships, you can get 1/700 and 1/350 scale models of both of these. So the Italian ship Horizon, I've built the 1/700 scale model made by Snowman Models. It's a resin and photo etch model, which you can see on the bottom left-hand side. Builds up quite nicely, and it looks fairly closely accurate compared to the real ship. I got the model before seeing the real ship, and I was quite pleased with the way the real ship matched the model. Type 45, obviously, you can get model kits of the Type 45. Airfix produced their 1/350th kit about 10 years ago. Trumpeters produced a more recent one in 1/350 scale as well, and I must say the Trumpeter one's somewhat better. Airfix is waterline, Trumpeter is full hull. And the Airfix one that I built 10 years ago has warped quite badly over time. The plastic is not very stable. Trumpeter is somewhat better plastic, I believe. And then if we look at smaller scale, there's a company called Dragon, which is Chinese, that builds into a nice 1/700 scale kit. They do a waterline model, and you can see the resemblance to the real thing above. It includes all sorts of nice little features like photo etch for the boarding ladder, for example. I built a number of versions of the Type 45 in both scales, 1/350th and 1/700th. There are two versions here shown from above, and I'll just point out what's going on the foredeck in the next picture. Because Type 45s are being improved, it's turned out that a destroyer that's built for the North Atlantic and for fairly hot warfare against a state actor like Russia isn't necessarily terribly well equipped for fighting lesser actors who might have a lot more shorter range, cheaper weapons such as drones that are ranged against the ship. So the Type 45s are being improved. On the right, you've got Type 45 as it was built. You had Harpoon anti-ship missiles, which are now going out of service because they're becoming obsolete. You had Sea Viper, which was the PAMS weapon system that's shared with the French and Italians. That's for dealing with fairly sophisticated air threats. And you had the 4.5-inch gun. If you go on to the left-hand figure, this is what the ship is looking like when it comes out of refit over the next 2 to 3 years as they cycle through their refits. Harpoon's been replaced by the Naval Strike Missile, which is a Norwegian missile, much more modern than Harpoon, much more capable, can do land attack as well as anti-ship work. The Sea Viper missiles are staying the same, but some shorter range Sea Scepter missiles are being added in a space that was cunningly left vacant in the initial build of Type 45 in case we needed an upgrade. They're good for taking out shorter range threats, and effectively they're cheaper shorter range missiles. The 4.5-inch gun stays. And sometime next year, there'll also be some laser-directed energy weapons put on the Type 45 to help counter attack from drones and short-range weapons. Using a laser to try and down a drone is much cheaper than using a missile. But I managed to get scratch built and aftermarket parts to make that improvement to the Type 45 model, so it reflects what's coming out of the dockyard in a few months' time. So just to summarise, Project Horizon had some offspring. We have the Type 45s, which are being improved. The French and the Italians are both improving their Horizon and Orrizonte frigates as well. Again, similar things, putting on them directed energy weapons and shorter range missiles to counter lighter threats like drones. And the common new generation frigate consortium that stayed together with the French and Italians went on to produce the FREM, the Frigate European Multi-Mission, which was again a design shared by France and Italy. They built multiple versions. They've exported quite a few. It was also the basis for the American Constellation frigate, which has now been terminated. There's only going to be 2 of those built because Mr. Trump's battleship is going to take precedence with shipbuilding in the US now, I think. And that's just about the end of the presentation. And you can see the Orrizonte frigate floating away into the horizon there.